My name is Margaret Lane. I'm 65 years old, and until recently I believed my life had been small. Quiet, nothing remarkable. I didn't travel the world, I never wrote a book, I didn't raise children of my own. But I did raise one child, my sister's son, and if there's any truth left in this world, that should mean something. It all started with a weekend. That's what she told me, just watch him for the weekend, Mags. I need time to think. I remember standing at the door of my small apartment with a dish towel still in my hand when she pushed a diaper bag into my arms and kissed the top of Daniel's head. "I'll be back Sunday," she said. But Sunday came and went. So did Monday, and then a year, and then a decade. Daniel never cried much, not even in those early days. Maybe he sensed I didn't have much to give except everything. I was 20 at the time, fresh out of nursing school, barely making enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. But I took him in, wrapped him in the blanket my mother had crocheted before she passed, and told him the truth I'd come to believe myself. "You didn't ask to be here, little one, but now that you are, I won't let go." Raising him was a series of small sacrifices that didn't feel like sacrifices at all. I passed up the Johns Hopkins Fellowship I'd been dreaming of since sophomore year. I turned down an opportunity to join a team traveling with Doctors Without Borders. I ended my engagement with Thomas after he told me he wasn't sure he wanted to build a life with someone else's child. I packed away the white dress I'd never wear, and every night I sang Daniel to sleep. At age 5, he asked me why he didn't have a dad like the other kids. I told him the truth in the simplest way I could. Families come in all shapes, baby. Some are born, some are built. Ours was chosen. And he smiled wide and gap-toothed and said, "Then I'm lucky." That night I stayed up and sewed patches into his school pants. "Lucky," he had said, as if what I had was something other than love stretched thin across long hours and aching feet. He was brilliant, that much was clear. He devoured books, asked hard questions, and cared deeply about being somebody. So I worked nights, picked up shifts on holidays, and said no to vacations for 18 straight years. I never had a car, I didn't take trips. My apartment was small, but it was clean and quiet. I gave up space for peace. And everything I had went to Daniel. When he was 16, he said he wanted to be a lawyer. I remember that conversation so clearly. We were eating reheated lasagna on the sofa, the one piece of furniture I'd bought brand new. He was watching some legal drama and looked at me, eyes lit with something beyond teenage ambition. "I want to fight for people, Aunt Margaret," he said, "make things fair." I smiled. "Then that's what you'll do." He earned a full academic scholarship to Whitmore College, not full tuition, just partial. The rest I made up for with the only real asset I had, the farmhouse my parents left me when they passed. It wasn't much, but it was ours. White clapboard, a front porch with peeling paint. An old well in the yard that hadn't worked since I was a kid. I sold it and I didn't look back. It was enough to cover the gap in Daniel's tuition and give him a clean start. He promised he'd take care of me someday. Said it during graduation, tears in his eyes, arms tight around me. I'll never forget this, Aunt Margaret, I swear. I believed him, not because he said it, but because I wanted to. You see, when you raise a child who isn't yours, the world gives you strange looks. People assume you're a placeholder, a backup plan, but I had loved Daniel from the moment I held him. Not because I had to, because I chose to. After law school, he married Olivia Chandler, the daughter of a state senator. She was poised, graceful, and always seemed to be watching me with a kind of curious distance, like I was a painting in a museum she didn't quite understand. When they bought their home in a gated neighborhood with glossy hedges and names like Cedar View and Oak Ridge Heights, they asked me to move into the guest house. Olivia said it was for my comfort. Daniel said it was because I'd done too much for too long. "You've worked enough," he told me. "We want you to rest." And I thought maybe finally I could. The guest house was lovely, one bedroom, a small kitchenette. A window seat that overlooked the garden. I kept my job part-time not because I had to anymore, but because the hospital was where I still felt useful. My last patient was Evelyn Blackstone. 92 years old, sharp as a blade and completely alone. I was her nurse for 15 years. Over time, I became her companion, her confidant, her only real friend. Every Sunday we played chess. She read Russian novels. She recited Yeats by heart. She never had children. But she asked me once very softly, "Do you think love ever really disappears, Margaret? Or does it just hide in the ones we give it to?" I didn't know how to answer then. But now maybe I do. The week she passed, she asked me to sit with her one last time. I've made arrangements, she said. There's something you'll receive after I'm gone. I want you to use it. For yourself, finally. I thought she meant a letter or maybe an old watch. I didn't ask. It felt too intimate, too final. 2 weeks after the funeral, the hospital cut my hours. Budget restructuring, they said. Then 3 days later, I was forced into early retirement. I wasn't ready, but I thought it'll be okay. Daniel promised he'd take care of me. The guest house was my home. I'd helped raise his children. I was still family. So I walked into their kitchen that Friday evening. Olivia was sipping wine. Daniel was scrolling on his phone. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. They're ending my contract early, I said. The severance won't last long. But I'll find something part-time, and I can help more around here. The silence that followed was thick. Olivia placed her glass on the counter with a soft clink. Daniel didn't look up. We've actually been meaning to talk, he said. About the guest house. My stomach dropped. We're converting it into an office, Olivia said, smiling politely. The twins are coming home for the summer, and Daniel's working on a big case. I blinked. So, where am I supposed to go? Daniel cleared his throat. There's a senior living facility 40 minutes away. I looked into it. Very reasonable rates. They have a work exchange program too. You could help in the clinic to offset rent. I didn't speak. You've always been practical, he said. We just can't subsidize your living expenses anymore, not with the twins' tuition, and we assumed you were saving. I stared at him. I had saved, and then I'd spent it all on him, on his education, his rent, his food, his books. I had nothing left because I had given everything, but I didn't say that, not yet. I asked, how long do I have? The contractors start Monday. 2 days to leave the only home I had left. I walked back to the guest house that evening with my vision blurred and my heart hollow. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, but I barely heard it. The manicured garden that once felt warm and welcoming now seemed foreign, curated, cold. Inside, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the space I'd called home for the last 15 years. It had been a haven, a place filled with memories, quiet rituals, and unspoken love. But now even the air felt different. Still and stiff, as if the walls themselves were recoiling from me. I didn't cry, not yet. I pulled out the old cardboard boxes I kept in the closet, the ones I'd saved just in case. I never imagined I'd actually need them. As I packed, every object I touched whispered a piece of my past. A handmade quilt Daniel and I stitched together for his school project when he was 10. The seashell collection we'd built from our rare trips to Cape May. The small ceramic owl he'd painted in 2nd grade, chipped now, but still intact. I wrapped each item with shaking hands, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest. Then I came to the photograph. It sat on the bookshelf, nestled between 2 faded novels. Daniel's graduation day. He was hugging me tightly, his eyes glossy, his smile wide. I remembered the moment vividly, how he had looked at me and said, "Everything I am is because of you, Aunt Margaret. I'll take care of you always." I stared at the photo for a long time, and then, gently, I put it back on the shelf. Some memories, I realized, were too heavy to carry forward. By dawn, I had condensed my entire life into 2 suitcases and 3 small boxes. 45 years of love, labor, and sacrifice, distilled into a few belongings that could fit into the trunk of my aging Toyota. The guest house felt like it had already let go of me. Just before noon, a sharp knock came at the door. I opened it to find Olivia standing there in designer athleisure wear, holding a reusable coffee mug like she was en route to a Pilates class. Her gaze swept over the modest pile of boxes behind me. "I wanted to check if you needed any assistance," she said crisply. "James mentioned the senior facility has furnished units, so don't bother with any large items." "I'm aware," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Most of my things will stay." She nodded, looking vaguely relieved. "Good. The contractors begin demolition Monday at 8. James has scheduled a moving service to pick up any remaining items for donation. Demolition, not renovation. They wanted to erase any trace that I had ever lived here." She turned to go, then paused. "The twins are coming home this weekend. We'd prefer if you were settled elsewhere before they arrive. No need for awkward goodbyes. No need to explain why you're evicting their gray tant," I said under my breath. She didn't respond. James also set up your appointment at Oak Ridge Senior Living for this afternoon, she added. The director is expecting you at 2. They've been kind enough to expedite the paperwork. You should thank him. A favor, they called it, as if sending me away was an act of mercy. I've made other arrangements, I lied. Her perfectly arched eyebrows lifted. Oh, with whom? A former colleague. I'll be staying with her until I find something permanent. It was the first time I had lied to them, and the flicker of confusion that crossed Olivia's face gave me an unexpected rush of satisfaction. She recovered quickly. Well, that's probably for the best. James was concerned you wouldn't be able to afford Oak Ridge without our help. Then she held out her hand. We'll need your gate pass and house keys before you go. I handed them over. With that final insult, she turned and walked away. Her designer sneakers were silent on the garden path. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, not with grief but with something sharper. Anger maybe, or something even stronger, resolve. They weren't just pushing me out. They were erasing me. I had nowhere to go, no colleague waiting. No spare room at a friend's house. My small nursing salary had gone entirely toward Daniel's education, his rent, and later small gifts for the twins. I had nothing saved, no safety net. At 65, I was facing homelessness. With trembling fingers, I opened my phone and began searching for extended stay motels. Everything was more expensive than I'd imagined. Eventually, I found one with a weekly rate on the outskirts of the city. The online reviews were grim. Stains on everything, roaches in the shower, noisy neighbors. But it was all I could afford. I booked it for 2 weeks, the maximum my budget allowed. Then I called a ride share to take me to the bank. At First National, I requested to close my account. The teller looked up with concern. Are you sure, Miss Lane, you've been with us for over 30 years? I'm sure, I said. I'm relocating. She nodded and processed the paperwork, then handed me $42.75 in cash, everything I had left in the world. I stared at the money, remembering the time I'd withdrawn nearly 10 times that amount to pay Daniel's first semester at Harvard Law. The money had represented years of working double shifts and never taking a vacation. He had promised to repay me. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel: confirmed your appointment at Oak Ridge Senior Living. We'll drop you off at 1:30. Be ready. I didn't respond. Instead, I directed my driver to a coffee shop downtown. I couldn't bear to return to the guest house yet. I sat by the window, a paper cup of coffee growing cold in my hand, and watched the city move on without me. Everyone around me seemed to have purpose, destination, belonging, and I had none. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of it all. 45 years of sacrifice. 45 years of love given freely. And when I was no longer useful, I was disposable. Tears welled, but I blinked them back. My phone buzzed again, unknown number. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. Is this Margaret Lane? A deep male voice asked. Yes, I said, cautious. Who's calling? My name is Michael Goldstein. I'm the executor of Evelyn Blackstone's estate. I've been trying to reach you. My heart stilled. I'm sorry, I said. I've had a difficult week. There's nothing to worry about, he said. I need to meet with you regarding Mrs. Blackstone's will. You're listed as a beneficiary. I gripped the edge of the table. There must be a mistake. Evelyn didn't have family. There's no mistake, Miss Lane, he said gently. She was quite specific. I couldn't breathe. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? He asked. It's rather urgent. I agreed. Of course I did. Then I sat there for a long time, the phone in my lap, my coffee forgot. I had no idea what she had left me. A keepsake maybe, a few $1,000s, but what I didn't know, what I couldn't yet imagine, was that everything was about to change. That evening, I returned to the guest house for the last time. Daniel was already waiting outside. He leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The same boy I once rocked to sleep, now a man with cold eyes and a polished exterior. You didn't answer my text, he said, not bothering with a greeting. We're supposed to leave for Oak Ridge in 20 minutes. I stepped past him and opened the door. I won't be going. He blinked. What are you talking about? We made arrangements. No, I said quietly. You made arrangements. I never agreed to them. He sighed, the way a lawyer might when dealing with a difficult client. Aunt Margaret, please be reasonable. You have nowhere else to go. I turned to him. I have a meeting tomorrow morning with the executor of Evelyn Blackstone's estate. Apparently, I've been named in her will. He stiffened. She was wealthy, wasn't she? He asked too quickly. Very wealthy. I don't know what she left me, if anything, I replied, though the flicker of hope in his eyes made my stomach turn. Well, he said after a beat, in that case, maybe we should wait on the senior home. Just until we know more. I've already made other arrangements. That's unnecessary, he said, adopting his lawyer's voice again, measured, reasonable, manipulative. Your family. You should stay until things are clearer. He meant until he knew how much I'd inherited. If I was still poor, I'd be gone. If I was rich, he'd pivot. I shook my head. I've called a rideshare. I'm leaving tonight. His brow furrowed. The contractors don't start until Monday. You have the weekend. I prefer to go now. Where are you staying? With a colleague, I lied again. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. I'd lived here for 15 years and had never once defied him. Now the smallest act of independence left him unsettled. Well, keep me posted, he said, voice straining with forced warmth. I can go to the lawyer with you. Legal documents can be confusing. I'll manage. And I turned away. That night, while Daniel and Olivia were out at a charity gala, I loaded my modest belongings into the rideshare. The driver, a kind man named Ray, helped with my boxes and opened the door for me with surprising care. As we pulled away from the estate, the guard at the gate, Tony, who'd always greeted me warmly, looked startled. Moving out, Miss Lane? Yes, I said, keeping my voice light. Time for a change. He hesitated. Mr. Lane didn't mention it. No need to call, I interrupted. They're expecting me to leave. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. You take care of yourself, Miss Lane. You deserve good things. As the gate opened behind us, I didn't look back. I stared ahead. The motel was even worse than I'd feared. The neon sign buzzed like a dying insect. The parking lot was cracked and stained. Several men loitered near the ice machine, watching me too closely as I stepped out of the car. Lady, you sure this is the place? The driver asked. I nodded. Yes, thank you. He hesitated. I've got daughters your age. I hate leaving you here. I offered a brittle smile. It's temporary. I'll be fine. He helped me carry my suitcases up the rusted outdoor stairs and waited until I unlocked the room. Call another ride tomorrow, he said. Please don't walk out alone here. Inside the room, the air reeked of mildew. The carpet was stained. The mattress sagged. Somewhere in the next room, a couple was yelling. Down the hall, a baby cried. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my church dress, and finally allowed myself to cry, real sobs. Ugly, silent, body-shaking sobs that came from the deepest part of me. I cried for the girl I once was, full of dreams. I cried for the woman who gave everything and was left with nothing. I cried because love had not been enough to earn loyalty. At some point, a cockroach skittered across the floor and disappeared under the dresser. I pulled my feet onto the bed and hugged my knees. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat, breathing in the scent of old despair, waiting for morning. By dawn, my back ached and my eyes were swollen, but I dressed carefully. I wore the navy dress I had kept for important occasions and pinned the silver brooch Evelyn had given me last Christmas. She'd said it reminded her of moonlight. I had never worn it before. Outside, the motel clerk barely looked up from his phone as I passed. My rideshare arrived 10 minutes later. This driver didn't ask questions. She simply took my bags, confirmed the address, and began the drive into the city. The law office was on the top floor of a glass tower, sleek, clean, and utterly foreign to me. The receptionist offered me water in a real glass and invited me to wait. Mr. Goldstein will be with you shortly, Miss Lane. When he emerged, he was tall, silver-haired, and kind-eyed. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a private conference room. Miss Lane, he said, smiling gently, thank you for coming. I understand you were Mrs. Blackstone's nurse for many years. 15, I replied, though she became more of a friend near the end. She spoke of you often, he said, with real affection. A pause. Mrs. Blackstone amended her will 3 years ago after a conversation with you, he continued. She noted your dedication not just to her care but to your nephew. She believed your sacrifices had gone unseen. I swallowed hard. She left a portion of her estate to you, he said, sliding a document across the table. This is the relevant section of her will. I picked up the page with trembling fingers. To Margaret Ruth Lane, it read, who has shown me the meaning of devotion without expectation, I leave the sum of $12 million. $12 million. I looked up stunned. There must be a mistake. There isn't, he said kindly. Mrs. Blackstone was of sound mind, she was very specific. I couldn't process the words, 12 million, 12 million. She wanted to ensure you would never again depend on the promises of others for your security, he said. My breath caught. Just yesterday, I had been calculating how many nights I could afford in a roach-infested motel. Today, I was being offered a life I had never dared to imagine. We can issue an advance from the trust today, he continued. Would $50,000 be helpful for immediate needs? I nodded mutely. He made a few calls. His assistant entered with a check and a card for a private driver who would take me to a temporary hotel. Something more comfortable, Mr. Goldstein had said. I left the office in a daze. My phone buzzed, 3 missed calls from Daniel. A text, any news from the lawyer, call me ASAP. I turned off the phone. I wasn't ready. I was still Margaret Lane after all, a woman in sensible shoes and department store clothes. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in decades, the choice was mine. The driver opened the door for me as if I were royalty. Miss Lane, he asked, his tone professional but warm. We'll be heading to the Four Seasons downtown. A suite has been reserved for you. The words felt surreal. Just last night, I'd been afraid to pull back the motel bedsheets. Now I was being ushered into a black sedan with tinted windows, my name spoken with quiet reverence. The city blurred past the window, but my mind stayed anchored in that conference room with Mr. Goldstein and the words that had upended everything. $12 million. Even thinking it felt absurd. What did someone like me do with that kind of money? When we arrived, the concierge greeted me by name. Welcome, Miss Lane, he said as if I were a regular guest. The hotel manager personally escorted me upstairs. The suite was spacious, elegant, floor-to-ceiling windows, soft lighting, thick carpets that silenced every footstep. There was a marble-soaking tub in the bathroom and towels thicker than anything I'd ever owned. And yet I stood in the center of the room, frozen, dwarfed by it all. May I offer you a welcome beverage? The manager asked. Champagne, perhaps, or tea. I hesitated. Tea, I said quietly. That would be lovely. When he left, I walked slowly to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I should have felt triumphant, relieved, empowered, but instead I felt untethered. For so long, my identity had been woven into caregiving, into sacrifice, into invisibility. Now no one needed anything from me, no one expected anything of me, and I didn't know who that made me. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, 7 missed calls, 4 unread texts, the latest. This is ridiculous, Aunt Margaret. Where are you? I'm starting to worry. We need to talk about the will. He didn't want to know how I was. He wanted to know what Evelyn had left me. I stared at his name on the screen, then set the phone face down and didn't answer. The tea arrived in delicate china. Along with it came a tray of pastries and finger sandwiches I hadn't asked for. I sat by the window, sipping slowly, trying to piece together a future I'd never imagined needing to build. Later that afternoon, the hotel's shopping coordinator came to my suite, a young woman named Mia, stylish but thoughtful. Without asking invasive questions, she helped me choose a few elegant outfits, proper sleepwear, toiletries, and even a light robe. It's all been arranged through Mr. Goldstein's office, she said. You don't need to worry about a thing. I paused, swallowing. I've never bought things this way before. You're not the first, Mia said gently. Sudden wealth is disorienting. My best advice, don't rush. Let yourself breathe. I nodded. Her kindness felt like a life preserver in waters I didn't yet know how to swim. That evening, I stood barefoot in the center of the suite, wearing one of the new silk robes Mia had selected. The fabric felt like water against my skin. The city lights sparkled outside the window, but inside it was quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for footsteps or cooking dinner for someone else or folding laundry that wasn't mine. I was just being. I turned my phone back on before bed. Another message from Daniel. If you don't call me back, I'm filing a missing persons report. I laughed. Actually laughed. He hadn't checked on me when I told him I was being forced into early retirement. Hadn't asked where I would live. Hadn't wondered how I'd pay for groceries. But now that I might be rich, he was panicking. I sent a single text. I'm fine, settling into new arrangements. We'll be in touch when I'm ready. His reply came within seconds. What arrangements? Where are you? We need to talk about the will. I didn't answer. I turned off my phone again, placed it on the nightstand, and pulled the soft blanket over me. I didn't fall asleep right away. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't lie awake worrying about how I would survive tomorrow. Instead, I let myself imagine what it might mean to finally, truly live. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No slamming cupboards, no distant voices from across the yard, no one needing anything from me. For the first few minutes, I simply lay there, cocooned in warmth and soft light, letting my body rest in a way it hadn't in years. I wasn't rushing to a shift. I wasn't preparing a school lunch. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come knocking. I was simply Margaret Lane. Later, I ordered breakfast, an indulgence I'd never even considered before. Poached eggs, fresh fruit, and a pot of tea were brought up on a silver tray. I ate slowly by the window, watching the city move below me like a distant dream. At 10 a.m. sharp, Sarah Blackburn arrived. She was a financial advisor recommended by Mr. Goldstein. Tall, composed, somewhere in her 50s, with a no-nonsense voice that reminded me of the senior nurses I used to admire. "Mr. Goldstein said you'd like help understanding your trust," she said, laying several folders out on the dining table. "You're not alone. Many people find sudden wealth overwhelming." "That's putting it mildly," I admitted. Over the next 3 hours, she walked me through the basics. The trust Evelyn had set up would generate around $600,000 a year in interest income, conservatively invested. She outlined how the money could be accessed, how taxes would work, and most importantly, how to protect it. "You could live quite comfortably on a third of this," she explained. "The rest can continue to grow, or you can use it for giving, travel, education, anything really. The point is, you have options." I blinked. I hadn't had options in decades. Every decision I'd made had been based on someone else's needs. We moved on to housing. "I suggest renting for 6 months," she said. "Give yourself time, you've just experienced a major life rupture. Don't rush into buying a place unless you're certain." When she left, I was exhausted, but not in the usual way. It wasn't the fatigue of overwork or stress. It was the heaviness that comes from unlearning an entire identity. I wasn't just Aunt Margaret anymore. I wasn't the nurse from Westgate. I wasn't anyone's afterthought. I was a woman with agency, with resources, with time. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, I stared at it. He had left 8 more messages since my single text reply. The last one said, "At least tell me where you're staying. I can come by. We need to talk face to face." I pressed decline. He called again. This time I answered. "Aunt Margaret," he began, a little breathless. "Where are you? Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you." "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I'm staying in a hotel while I look for a new place." "With what money?" he asked before he could catch himself. Then, realizing his mistake, softened his tone. "Sorry, that came out wrong. I want to help. This doesn't have to be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" I echoed, my voice sharp now. "You gave me 48 hours to vacate my home, Daniel, the only home I've had in 15 years. "I was under a lot of pressure," he said quickly. "The twins are coming home." "Olivia and I, look, we didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to help me either." Silence. He tried again. "So, she left you something then, Evelyn?" "She did." "How much?" "I'm not going to answer that." He paused. Okay. "But whatever it is, maybe now we can revisit things. You can come back. Even if we can't give you the guest house permanently, we could convert the den into something comfortable." "The den?" "A room off the kitchen, barely big enough for a desk and a chair." That was his grand gesture, offering me a corner in his home like I was some forgotten trinket. "No, thank you," I said. "I've already made other arrangements. You can't seriously think you can manage all this alone." "I don't think," I said softly. "I know." He fell silent again. "I'm not angry, Daniel," I added. "But I see things clearly now." The line was quiet for a long moment. "You're really cutting me off, aren't you?" he said at last, a tremor in his voice. "After everything we've been through." "I'm not cutting you off, I'm setting a boundary. You crossed it, you don't get to do that again." He made one final attempt. "Well, at least let me help manage whatever Evelyn left. I know the legal side of these things. Financial planning is what I do. We're family." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "You've mistaken family for entitlement." Then I hung up, not in anger, not in triumph, but in peace. I sat in the quiet of my suite, hands trembling slightly, heart racing not with fear, but with a sense of release. After 45 years, I had stopped justifying my existence to someone else. And I knew this was the real inheritance, not just the money, but the power to say no, to choose, to leave, to breathe. That night, I opened the windows and let in the evening breeze. I sat in the armchair with a book I'd bought earlier, a novel I had always meant to read but never had time for. The city lights sparkled like stars at my feet. And for the first time, the world felt wide open, not because someone had given me permission to live, but because I had finally given it to myself. The sun was gentler than usual that morning. A golden hush spilled through the windows of the hotel suite, washing over the polished floors and pale linen curtains. I stood there for a long time, barefoot, watching the light filter through. I had never had a morning like this. No shift to run to, no medication charts to double-check, no school drop-offs, no meals to prep, no bills to juggle, just me, my tea, and silence. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Because when you've spent your entire adult life surviving, you forget how to simply choose. And now I had choices, more than I ever dreamed. But where do you even begin? The answer came oddly enough in the form of a gentle knock. "Good morning, Miss Lane," Mia smiled from the hallway, a portfolio tucked under her arm. "I thought you might be ready to start looking for something more permanent." She didn't say the word home. Maybe she sensed that I wasn't quite ready for it yet. "Would you like to see a few options today?" she asked. I hesitated, but then I nodded. "Let's try," I whispered. We started with what Mia called executive penthouses. The first one had a view so wide it felt like flying. Glass walls, imported marble floors, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a futuristic showroom. A doorman had opened the building's front doors like I was someone important. A concierge had offered espresso. But as I walked through the echoing silence of the penthouse, I couldn't hear myself breathe. My footsteps didn't sound like mine. Everything felt borrowed. "This is lovely," I said to Mia, forcing a smile, "but it doesn't feel like me." She nodded. "Let's try something different." The second place was more traditional, a townhouse in a new luxury development. The colors were warm, the floors polished oak. But it smelled too much like new paint, like memory hadn't touched it yet. I imagined living there and couldn't picture a single book on the shelf or a teacup out of place. It felt like a life someone else had designed. By the fourth house, I began to wonder if maybe I didn't belong anywhere anymore. But Mia, wise in her quiet way, simply said, "I have one more place to show you. It's not in the city center, but something tells me you might like it." Lakeshore Grove, even the name made me pause. I'd passed through the neighborhood before, back when I worked double shifts and couldn't afford to dream. It was the kind of place you told yourself you didn't need. Leafy streets, big porches, soft laughter behind hedges. It was a neighborhood that whispered, "You're safe here." The house was a Victorian, pale blue with white trim and ivy winding gently up one side. A wide front porch with a wooden swing. Wind chimes at the edge of the eaves, just soft enough to be heard if you were quiet. As Mia opened the front door, a breeze stirred through the hallway, carrying the scent of old wood and something faintly floral. Light poured in through stained glass windows, casting jewel-colored shapes onto the hardwood floor. "I'll let you walk through on your own," Mia said, handing me the keys. "Take your time." The kitchen had copper pans hanging from a ceiling rack. There was a reading nook with a deep, cushioned bench flanked by built-in shelves that begged for well-loved books. The windows overlooked a small garden in the back, roses, lavender, and what looked like a worn stone fountain. I climbed the narrow stairs slowly, running my hand along the banister. Upstairs, the master bedroom had bay windows with sheer curtains that moved like breath. The walls were painted the softest shade of green. There was a clawfoot tub, an old rocking chair in the corner, a small writing desk beside the window. And suddenly there was no noise in my mind. No questions, no math, no compromise, only this strange, quiet knowing this is where I could begin again. Not because it was big, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like me, not the version of me who slept on hospital breakroom cots, not the version of me who nodded politely at charity galas, but the woman underneath all of that, the one who still believed in quilts and wind chimes and dinners made from scratch, the one who wanted to be still again. I came back downstairs slowly. Mia didn't ask me what I thought. She only smiled like she already knew. "I'll take it," I said, her smile widened. "Furnished or unfurnished?" "Furnished for now, I'll make it mine slowly." That night I returned to the Four Seasons and packed my things. It didn't take long. My new silk robe, a few dresses, 2 paperbacks I had picked up from the hotel gift shop, some soft slippers, my mother's brooch which I wore now like a quiet reminder of where I'd come from. I called the driver Mr. Goldstein had arranged and gave him the new address. As the city lights faded behind us and we entered the quiet streets of Lakeshore Grove, I felt a peace settle into my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge, just peace. The house was waiting, the porch light was on. The wind chimes stirred gently as I stepped inside. No one had told me where to put my shoes, no one had left a passive-aggressive list on the fridge. No one was waiting to ask what I could contribute. This home asked for nothing but my presence. I unpacked slowly. I put the books in the shelf beside the reading nook. I laid my robe over the rocking chair. I brewed a cup of tea and carried it out to the back garden. The night air was cool, the scent of jasmine rising from somewhere unseen. I sat by the fountain, the warm cup in my hands. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't surviving someone else's expectations. I was building something of my own, not because someone gave it to me, but because I finally believed I was allowed to want more. The house was quiet when I woke up the next morning, but not the silence of absence or neglect, the kind I'd known too well in the guest house where every peaceful moment felt borrowed. No, this was a different kind of quiet. A kind that belonged to me, a stillness I didn't have to earn. Sunlight streamed through the bay window in my bedroom, casting soft gold across the floorboards. I sat up slowly, wrapped in my robe, and looked around. I was still getting used to the idea that this space, this comfort, this freedom was mine. I had tea on the back porch that morning. The fountain gurgled gently. A bird landed on the fence, fluffed its feathers, and flew off again. The garden was a little wild around the edges, just like me, but it was alive. I hadn't touched my phone in 2 days. I knew what would be waiting there. Still, I turned it on. 22 messages, 4 missed calls from unknown numbers. 11 from Daniel, 3 voicemails from Olivia, and a few texts that, at first glance, veiled panic beneath politeness. Daniel, I just want to make sure you're okay. Daniel, if you've come into some kind of money, we need to make sure it's handled properly. Daniel, please call me, we're family. There it was again, that word, family, used like a lever, a reminder, a guilt trip, a claim. I sat there for a while staring at the screen. Then, for the first time, I called him not out of obligation, but because I had something to say. He answered on the second ring. Aunt Margaret, he breathed, thank God. I've been calling for days. I know, I said quietly. Where have you been? Are you all right? I was about to file a report. I'm fine, Daniel, truly. I've moved into a place of my own. There was a pause. A place of your own, his voice tightened. Where, with what? Did Evelyn, Mrs. Blackstone, did she leave you something significant? I let the question hang in the air. She left me enough, I said, enough to take care of myself. To start over. He tried to sound supportive, but I knew that tone. He used it in courtrooms when he wanted to sound reasonable. That's great, he said. Really, I just wish you'd told me. We could have helped you plan. Financial matters can get messy if you don't have the right kind of guidance. You made it clear you didn't want me in your life unless I could fund myself, I replied. So I did, and now I don't need help. Especially not from someone who saw me as a burden. That's not fair, he said quickly. We were overwhelmed, the twins were coming home, Olivia was stressed, you just lost your job, and I had just given 45 years of my life to others. And you decided I didn't fit anymore. He went quiet. I took a breath, not shaky, not angry, just steady. You've spent your life in control, Daniel, I said, of your clients, your house, your narrative. But you don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to decide when I matter. Aunt Margaret, he started, voice quieter now. Please, let's not throw away everything. I'm still your nephew. You raised me. Don't let money come between us. This isn't about money, I said. This is about how you treated me when you thought I had none. The next day, he showed up at the house. I saw his car from the upstairs window. I could have pretended not to be home, but something in me, something old and soft and fearful, told me to stay quiet. But something new stood up. I met him at the door. He looked the same as always, tailored coat, polished shoes. But there was an unease in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, like he knew he wasn't walking into the home of the same woman who used to iron his shirts. This is lovely, he said, stepping onto the porch. It is, I replied, blocking the doorway. Can I come in? No. He blinked. I want to talk, he said, so talk. Look, I'm sorry about what happened, he said. We panicked. The guest house, my job, the kids, there was a lot going on. I shouldn't have handled it that way. You didn't handle anything, you discarded me. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Did she leave you enough to live on? That's none of your concern. It is if you're being taken advantage of. I laughed, actually laughed. No one is taking advantage of me anymore, Daniel. That chapter of my life closed when you told me to pack in 48 hours. He swallowed. Let me help, he said. You don't have the background to manage this kind of estate. There are taxes, trusts, investment portfolios. I know how to make it last. I tilted my head. Do you? He faltered just for a second. I'm offering to help as family. Family doesn't come knocking only when there's something to gain. His jaw clenched. You really think I'm only here because of the money? I think if I'd moved into a budget studio and taken a minimum wage job at a senior center, you wouldn't be standing on my porch. He didn't answer. I'm building something of my own now, I continued. Something built on kindness, boundaries, peace, and you are not welcome to disturb it. He stood there for a long time, then finally, you've changed. Yes, I said. I've finally changed. That night I wrote in a journal I hadn't touched since my 20s. The pen felt unfamiliar in my hand, but the words came easily. Today I said no, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because I finally know that I'm allowed to. My love was never the problem. My silence was. I closed the book. In the quiet of the garden, I sipped tea and listened to the wind in the trees. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. And for the first time, I understood, saying no isn't the opposite of love. It's how love begins, with yourself. I had spent so many years giving everything I had to help others build their futures, Daniel's education, his home, his career, even his children's summer camps and private schools. But I had never asked myself what I wanted to build. Not until now. The answer came gently, not in a flash of insight, but like morning light slowly filtering into a dark room. It came in the form of a thick manila envelope delivered to my new home with elegant handwriting on the label. Aliner Blackstone Foundation board materials enclosed. Inside was a letter, a real one, not typed but written by hand, familiar, graceful handwriting I recognized even after a year. Margaret, if you're reading this, then I've already said my quiet goodbye to this world. But before I left, I wanted to give you something more than money. I wanted to give you a place at the table. A place where your voice matters. Tears welled in my eyes. I had always thought my care for Evelyn was a quiet footnote in her long, solitary life. But she had seen me, not just as her nurse, but as a woman, a mind, a heart, a witness. And now I was being invited to become something I never thought I could be, a contributor, a decision maker, a builder of something lasting. The first board meeting was set for Thursday. I debated for hours what to wear. This wasn't a hospital corridor or a charity bake sale. These were people who'd spent their careers in medicine, law, philanthropy, and finance. People with resumes long enough to fold into books. And then there was me, Margaret Lane, a retired nurse who still flinched at the price tags on silk blouses. But when I arrived at the foundation's headquarters, an elegant but modest building nestled in the old arts district, I walked in with my back straight and my chin lifted. Not because I felt like I belonged, but because I finally knew I didn't need to prove that I did. There were 6 of us at the long table in the boardroom. I was the only new face. The executive director, a kind-eyed woman named Camille, introduced me to the group. Margaret Lane brings decades of healthcare experience in long-term care, as well as lived knowledge of systemic gaps in elder services and care support for working-class families, she said. She'll be a valuable voice for our upcoming Rural Access Initiative. I blinked. Valuable, not generous, not kind, not selfless, valuable. It was the first time anyone had described me that way. The meeting began. Budgets. Grant approvals, site evaluations. I took notes, listened, asked quiet questions, and slowly something inside me stirred, not just confidence, purpose. When they began discussing a new mobile health clinic for underserved areas, I cleared my throat. I used to run shifts in a beach town every summer, I said. A lot of seasonal workers, older adults, even tourists with emergency needs. The problem was never just distance, it was trust. They didn't come because they didn't believe we'd care. Camille nodded slowly. So how do we build that trust? You hire people who know the community. You let the patients speak first. You let them teach you. A silence fell over the room, but not a cold one. They were listening. By the end of the meeting, I had been assigned to co-chair the Rural Health Initiative Task Force, not because of pity, not because I had money, but because I had something to offer. I walked home that evening with a strange new energy in my step. Not youth, not ego, but aliveness. The kind that comes when you're not just surviving the day, but shaping it. That night, I wrote again in my journal. I used to think that if I wasn't useful, I had no value. Now I know that my value is not in what I give away, but in what I build with intention. Over the next weeks, my days began to fill again, but not with obligation. I visited prospective clinic sites, spoke with local nurses, sat with young social workers trying to serve too many patients with too little funding. I knew that feeling in my bones. At home, I began adding touches to the townhouse, fresh linens, a record player, photos of me smiling with no one else in the frame. I planted herbs in the garden. I signed up for a watercolor class. And I kept declining Daniel's calls, not out of spite, but because I knew he didn't want to connect. He wanted access. And for once, I wasn't granting it. One morning, I received a letter forwarded from my old P.O. box. It was from a woman I didn't know, someone who had once worked as a CNA under my supervision at the hospital. She wrote, "I was 19. You were the first person who ever told me I was smart. You covered my shift when my grandmother passed. You stood up for me when a surgeon yelled at me like I was nothing. I never forgot that. I'm now head of my unit at St. James General. I just wanted you to know. You changed my life." I sat in the garden, the letter trembling in my hands. You never know who's watching you live. You never know what seeds your smallest kindness plants. I had spent a lifetime thinking I'd built nothing. But perhaps I'd built more than I knew. Later that week, Camille called. "Margaret," she said, "I wanted to tell you something in person, but I can't wait. The board has voted to promote you to vice chair. The way you're shaping the health equity work is already having an impact." "Vice chair," I repeated, stunned. Yes, Evelyn knew what she was doing when she named you. I hung up the phone and stared out the window for a long time. Then I whispered aloud, quietly, reverently, "I'm building something of my own. Not just a life, not just a legacy, but a self." I had just returned from a meeting at the foundation when I found the envelope waiting on my doorstep. No stamp, no courier label, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside, a typed letter from Daniel's attorney. Notice of intent to dispute ownership and contribution to real property assets. I read the words slowly. Not with panic, not with disbelief, but with a stillness that surprised even me. So this was it. The final attempt to regain control not over the house but over the story. Over what would be remembered, recorded, and passed down. Daniel had drawn the line, and I was ready to meet him at it. The next morning, I met with my legal advisor, Victoria. She was calm, incisive, and unmoved by intimidation, exactly the kind of woman I admired. After reviewing the claim, she looked up at me with a measured tone. "He's not just challenging your financial contribution," she said. "He's trying to erase it altogether." I nodded. I figured as much. "We can fight this formally. The financial records, mortgage payments, and your bank statements all support your case. You have legal standing." But she paused. "We also have leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Victoria leaned forward. "Daniel has built his image on the myth of being self-made. The truth, your truth, undermines that completely. If we threaten to take this public, I believe he'll fold." I looked out the window at the garden. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting shifting shadows across the floor. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want to humiliate him. I just wanted one thing, acknowledgement. We scheduled a mediation. He came, of course, suited as ever with his attorney at his side. But this time, something was different. His shoulders were tighter, his eyes less certain. He didn't look at me when he sat down. Victoria opened the meeting with professionalism and precision, outlining my contributions to the home he now claimed as solely his. The down payment from my parents' farmhouse, the 15 years of mortgage payments from my nursing shifts, the property taxes, even the repairs I'd quietly funded. "We are not here to reclaim the house," Victoria said. "We are not interested in monetary restitution. We are here to ask for one thing." She placed a single page on the table, a formal acknowledgement. Signed, notarized, and public. A document stating that I had purchased and funded the home from which I had been asked to leave. Daniel stared at it, silent. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but Daniel didn't respond. He looked at me instead, and for a flicker of a moment I saw the boy I'd raised. The boy with scraped knees and crayon drawings. The boy who used to call me my second mom. Then he blinked and the man returned. "What difference does this make to you?" he asked, voice brittle. "You have your own place now, more money than you could spend in a lifetime." I met his eyes. "It's not about the money, Daniel, it never was, it's about the truth. And about not letting you write me out of it." He looked away. After a long pause, he picked up the pen and signed. I walked home quietly that day, the wind catching the edge of my coat, the sky soft with coming rain. It didn't feel like a victory, it felt like peace, like something had finally been laid to rest, not between Daniel and me, but between the woman I used to be and the one I was becoming. Weeks passed. The air grew cooler. Leaves fell in gold and amber across the garden. And one morning my doorbell rang. Maria, my housekeeper, opened the door. "It's a young woman," she called softly. "She says her name is Leela." My heart paused. Daniel's daughter. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she was a shy girl in ballet flats, too quiet for the noisy adult world around her. She stood in my doorway now, taller, uncertain, holding a folder in one hand and a nervous smile. "Hi, Aunt Margaret," she said. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. We sat in the sunroom, tea between us. She fidgeted with the edge of the folder. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said. "Dad doesn't know. But I found something." She opened the folder. Inside were copies of old documents, bank statements, deed records, even letters I'd written decades ago. "I was looking for my birth certificate," she explained. "But I found these instead in Dad's locked file drawer, and I didn't understand. He always said the house was his first big step, that he bought it himself, that it was his way of repaying you." She looked up. "But this shows that you bought it, that you paid for everything." I didn't say anything. "I asked him about it," she continued, "and he got so defensive. He said it was complicated, that it was family business. But it didn't feel right." She paused. "I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not knowing, for not asking, and—" She looked me straight in the eyes. "I want to be different." That afternoon she stayed for hours. We talked about nursing, about resilience, about what it meant to be a woman in a world that only saw your value when you gave everything away. She told me she had withdrawn her application to business school. "I want to study healthcare," she said. "To actually help people like you did." I didn't cry, not until after she left. And then I did. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life someone had chosen my example, not my sacrifice, as their compass. Later that week I met with the foundation's board. I shared Leela's story, her decision, her courage, and I proposed something I'd been thinking about for weeks. A scholarship, not in my name, not in Evelyn's, but in honor of caregivers who never got a plaque, never had a title, but carried generations on their shoulders. A scholarship for second career nurses, for women returning to school after years of invisible labor. For people like me in other lives who just needed one open door. It was approved unanimously. And I smiled, because maybe this ripple, this act, this choice was the real legacy. That night I sat in my garden, journal open. The wind whispered through the lavender. Somewhere in the trees a mockingbird sang. I wrote, I thought the house was my offering. The money, the years, the sacrifices. But my true gift is who I became in the quiet after everything fell apart. That's what I want to leave behind, not what I gave away, but what I claimed for myself. And then I closed the journal, turned off my phone, poured a cup of tea, and watched the stars. The morning light spilled across my kitchen table, golden and soft, like it had nowhere else to be. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't rushing to be useful. I wasn't folding laundry between double shifts, wasn't making Daniel's coffee or preparing lunch for his children. I was sitting quietly with a cup of tea, and I was exactly where I needed to be, my own home. I never thought much about curtains or what color walls made me feel most at peace. I used to buy what was cheap, what was neutral, what wouldn't stand out or draw attention. That was the point, wasn't it? Not to take up space. But lately, I had been noticing things. How the sun filtered through lace panels. How a deep blue blanket made the sofa feel like a place to rest, not just sit. How the scent of bergamot oil diffusing from a small ceramic burner could quiet a racing heart. I was learning that a home doesn't have to be large to feel expansive. It just needs to recognize you when you walk in. And this house, it saw me, not as the nurse, not as the aunt, but as Margaret Lane, 65 years old, learning at last how to live. That fall, I signed up for a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center. I hadn't held a paintbrush since high school. But something in me longed for color, for softness, for a way to say things without words. The class met on Tuesday mornings, 10 of us in a warm room that smelled faintly of wood and turpentine. Most were retirees like me. But there was one man who stood out. He wore corduroy jackets, spoke gently, and painted skies with astonishing tenderness. His name was Paul. He was a widower, and he always saved the seat beside him. We didn't talk much at first. We painted. He focused on landscapes. I painted herbs in teacups. One day, while we were cleaning our brushes, he asked, "Why teacups?" I looked down at the small, imperfect image of rosemary sprouting from ceramic. "I think because they remind me of quiet," I said. He nodded. "And quiet deserves to be honored." After that, we shared small things. Childhood stories, favorite books, places we'd never seen but dreamed about. We never called it dating. But sometimes he'd bring me soup he made himself, always in mason jars with handwritten labels. And sometimes I'd tuck a homemade lemon bar into his coat pocket during class. No expectations, no roles to perform. Just presence. It was the gentlest kind of companionship, and it felt like breathing. One Saturday, I stood in the garden trimming back the mint and thyme when Leela stopped by. She'd begun her first clinical rotation and looked exhausted in the way only nursing students do. She dropped onto the garden bench with a long sigh. "I knew it would be hard," she said, "but I didn't know it would be this emotional." I handed her a glass of iced tea and sat beside her. "It's always emotional," I said softly. "That's what no one tells you. You don't just chart vitals or give pills. You hold hands in silence. You witness people when they're raw and real." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I don't think Dad understands why I'm doing this." "He might never," I said, "but you don't have to live for his understanding." She nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you," I added, "not for choosing what I chose, but for choosing what feels right for you." Tears welled in her eyes. No one had ever said that to her before. She had always been Daniel's daughter, the senator's granddaughter, the girl with polished shoes and invisible bruises. But now she was becoming Leela. I hosted a small dinner one evening, just 5 people: Paul, Leela, 2 women from my watercolor class, and a former nurse colleague who had recently retired. There was soup, fresh bread, a chocolate tart I'd practiced twice before serving, and laughter, so much laughter. No one asked for anything. No one measured my presence by my performance. They just came, sat, shared, existed. And as I stood at the sink afterward, washing dishes while music played softly from the old record player, I whispered something I hadn't dared say aloud in years. I love my life. Not because it was perfect, not because it made sense to anyone else, but because it was finally wholly mine. The next morning, Paul left a note on my doorstep. "Margaret, you've created something here that's rare. A life with room for beauty and space for others to breathe. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Paul." I folded the note, heart full. Maybe love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in soup jars, in Tuesday mornings, in the shared silence between 2 people no longer trying to prove anything. That weekend, I visited the old hospital, not as staff, not even as a former nurse. Just as a woman with time on her hands and something to offer. I brought cookies to the front desk, spoke with the new head nurse, a young woman named Priya who looked overworked and underslept. She asked if I ever missed it. I told her the truth. I missed the meaning, the team, but not the exhaustion, not the invisibility. She looked down. "I understand," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone even sees us." I placed a hand on hers. "I do," I said, "and so will others. Eventually, but until then, see yourself." That night I journaled. I used to believe my value was in my sacrifice. Now I see it's in my joy, my rest, my voice. And in the way I show up for myself even when no one else is watching. The house was quiet. The tea was warm, and I felt more alive than I ever had in my youth. I never set out to change the world. In fact, for most of my life, I was convinced the world barely noticed me at all. But there's something curious about quiet healing. Once you begin to live from a place of peace, your very presence becomes an invitation for others to do the same. It starts small, and then it ripples. Leela called one morning, breathless. I got accepted into the rural placement rotation for next semester." I could hear the thrill in her voice. "They only take 3 students a year, and I was sure they'd pick someone younger, someone more." She didn't finish the sentence. "Someone more what?" I asked gently. "More traditional," she said, "more polished." Less me. I smiled into the phone, but they picked you, darling. She exhaled, shaky, and then she said something that stayed with me for days. I think they saw something in me because I started letting them see it. You taught me how. That afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of peppermint tea and wrote the first lines of an essay. I didn't plan to publish it, I just needed to write it. What happens to women who live their lives as the background for someone else's success? What happens when they finally step into the center of their own story? The words came in waves. I wrote about caregiving, its beauty, its cost. I wrote about what it means to pour everything you have into someone else and then be discarded like a spent resource. I wrote about rediscovery, reclamation, and grace. When I finished, I read it aloud to myself. And for the first time in my life, I saw my own story not as a loss, but as a legacy in motion. With a little encouragement from Mia, the hotel concierge turned dear friend, I submitted the piece to a journal on aging and caregiving. 2 weeks later, they published it. It went viral in circles I'd never imagined: elder care forums, women's groups, medical training seminars. Emails began arriving, from daughters, from nurses, from widows, from strangers who felt, for the first time, seen. One line was quoted more than any other: "There is nothing shameful about needing rest after 40 years of love." And so the ripple grew. Soon after, the foundation invited me to speak at their annual gala. I nearly declined. What would I say? Who was I to stand on a stage before donors and executives and share my journey? But Sarah, the financial advisor turned friend, encouraged me. "Margaret, what you lived is what we all need to hear. You didn't inherit money, you inherited visibility, and you're using it wisely." I took a breath and I said yes. The night of the gala, I wore a navy blue gown with a silver shawl. Nothing too bold, but nothing invisible either. Leela accompanied me, her proud smile brighter than the chandeliers. When I stepped up to the podium, the room quieted. And I spoke not like a speaker, but like a woman who had earned her story. "I used to believe my value came from what I could endure," I began. "I believed I had to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's definition of devotion. That love was sacrifice, that silence was dignity, that disappearing was noble. I looked out at the sea of faces, but I know better now." And then I told them about Evelyn, about Daniel, about the eviction, the motel, the brooch. And finally, about Mrs. Blackwell's gift. "But the greatest inheritance," I said slowly, "wasn't the money, it was the permission to finally take up space in my own life." The room stood to applaud, but more importantly, they listened. A week later, I received an invitation to join a mentorship circle for late-life caregivers transitioning out of full-time care. It wasn't formal, just 6 women in their 60s and 70s meeting monthly over tea. Each one had spent decades tending to someone else's needs. Now they were staring down empty calendars and asking the same haunting question: who am I if I'm not needed? We met in my sunroom. At first they hesitated. They apologized for rambling, for crying, for saying things that sounded selfish. But slowly the truth began to rise. A woman named Beverly admitted she hadn't bought new clothes in 12 years because every dollar went to her husband's medication. A woman named Karen said she didn't know what food she liked anymore. She'd only ever cooked what her parents or children preferred. One afternoon, after a long silence, Gloria, whose voice always trembled, looked at me and said, "I didn't know it was okay to want things again." I reached across the table and took her hand. "It's not just okay, Gloria," I said, "it's necessary." The ripple extended in other ways. A medical school invited me to guest lecture in their palliative care class. A bookstore asked to host a reading of my essay. A nonprofit reached out to collaborate on a project supporting unpaid elder caregivers across the state. At first, I felt overwhelmed. I was just a former nurse with a quiet garden and a growing love for watercolor. But then I realized the world wasn't asking me to perform. It was simply responding to the version of me that was finally alive. One evening, Paul and I sat beneath the garden trellis. He held my hand, thumb gently tracing my knuckles. "You're different now," he said quietly. I turned to him. "Is that a bad thing?" He smiled. "No, it's luminous." I looked up at the stars. "You know," I said, "I used to be terrified of taking up space. Now I'm learning that space wasn't something I had to earn. It was mine all along." He kissed my knuckles. "And you're using it well." At the close of that season, Leela surprised me with something. She stood at my door one Saturday afternoon, cheeks flushed, holding a printed flyer. It was for a new student support group at her university. Title: The Second Circle Late Bloomers in Nursing. Mission: to support non-traditional students, those changing careers, returning to school after caregiving, or entering healthcare from unconventional paths. On the back was a quote: "We are not starting late, we are starting deep." I stared at it for a long time, then I looked up at her. "You made this." She nodded, and I pulled her into the kind of hug that speaks across generations. That night I sat in my garden again, journal open, stars overhead, and I wrote, "My name is Margaret Lane, I am 65. I spent 4 decades pouring into others and forgot to ask what filled me, but I am not empty. I am just beginning." The letter came in early spring. A simple white envelope addressed in a handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly a year. "Daniel." I hesitated before opening it. My tea had just finished steeping. The sun was warm on the windowsill. My roses were beginning to bloom again. Part of me didn't want to let it. "I don't believe in silver linings," I said that night. "I believe in seasons, in roots that hold through storms, in growth that comes after stillness. I believe that healing is not flashy, it's quiet. It begins with a whisper. I matter." And then I said, "I hope every woman who's ever felt erased hears me now. You are not too late, you are not too much. You are not a burden, you are a story still unfolding. And the best chapters may be just ahead." The room erupted, but more importantly, I heard myself, and I believed every word.